Francis, I mean, it's a great pleasure to come and talk to you in your little estate in the middle of the fens. It's really interesting to me that your career, I mean, you graduated 69, was it?
67, the year of Sergeant Pepper.
Right. Archaeology, I mean, the way you must have been taught to the way it is now a few decades later must feel like a different planet almost. You've seen massive changes in the way the field of archaeology works, you know, technology has changed, but you've also been a huge part through Time Team and the books you've written for the layman in a language that's popular yet informative, as ways of bringing the general public into it, which has changed hugely. I mean, I guess Mortimer Wheeler with Animal, Vegetable, Mineral was the precursor of that, but it's done it on a level that has touched everyone. And I just really like to explore that link of how you've caught that popular voice in your own head that can communicate those things, and now led you to create a character of an archaeologist who is, you know, embarking on a life of fiction with your, you know, Alan Cadbury novels. So, yeah, I mean, your thoughts of that change in the job.
Yeah, it was given a big boost after the war with Animal, Vegetable, Mineral. I mean, for the first and only time, 2 archaeologists were individually named as TV Personality of the Year, Sir Mortimer Wheeler and Glyn Daniel. I think Glyn Daniel, who was my professor at Cambridge later, was actually named twice, and he was the chairman of the thing. And actually, it was due to Sir Mortimer Wheeler that I started to get heavily involved in what you might call public archaeology, because I had a job just after finishing Cambridge, 2 years after. I got a job in a brewery, which is what every English young man wants to do, in Brick Lane in London, Truman's Brewery. I worked there for 2 years. And then towards the end of my time there, I suddenly realised, did I really want to, you know, die young, fat, because I was drinking vast amounts of beer, and for various reasons. And while I'd been in the brewery, I'd got jobs, lots of jobs in archaeology, going on digs, and it was in my blood. I mean, I had a degree in it, but in those days there weren't any jobs. There were just a few museum jobs, not like today when there are thousands of jobs, quite literally thousands. But there weren't any then, and that's why I was in the brewery. And so I emigrated to Canada and was unemployed for about 6 months, and eventually got a job in the Royal Ontario Museum. There was a purpose, there's a point to all this. And my boss in the Royal Ontario Museum was a lovely man, sadly no longer with us, called Doug Tushingham, who dug in Jerusalem and various other things. And he said, Francis, I've always wanted to do a dig in England, do a bit of reverse colonialism. Would you be interested? Well, you know, is the Pope a Catholic?
Try not to be too eager, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I went over to England, did a recce with some money that the Canadians gave me, and went on some medieval digs, because in those days, in the early 70s, 1970, it was medieval archaeologists who were advancing the subject, far more than prehistorians were.
Is that because they were finding more, literally? Or because...
It was partly that, yes. I mean, they're having to cope with data in large quantities, but also because at that time towns were beginning to expand quite fast after the war. It was a sort of post-war effect, and you know, most towns are medieval, and so they were coming up with new techniques, pioneering sort of geophysics and things like that, which were really taking the subject forward. And so I wanted to go on a medieval dig to make up for the 2 years when I'd been in the brewery. And so I did a recce in England, and I got a phone call from Canada halfway through, and it was Doug in Canada, and he said, "Francis, I've arranged for you to meet Sir Mortimer Wheeler in the British Academy in London." So, he gave me the date. Do make sure you're there. I thought, my God, yeah, of course I will. Because this man was God, absolute God. So I went to the British Academy, and I can remember going into the great marble hall with sort of black and white tiles on the floor, and it was very palatial. And there was this huge double door, and the double door swung out. And two of the most stunningly gorgeous young French women I have ever met in my life sort of tottered out on stiletto heels. And I stood there, my God, what's happening? And then behind them appeared Sir Mortimer Wheeler, twiddling his moustachios and looking every inch the sort of rogue, and a great man. And
did he have a grin as well?
He had a grin. Oh God, he had a grin. Oh, he was a lovely bloke. Anyway, I had a long talk with him, and one of the things he said to me, "Francis, yes, I think all your plans for digging in England are very good, but what you mustn't forget is that archaeology doesn't belong to us, it doesn't belong to archaeologists, it belongs to the public. It's everybody's history, and you have a moral duty to bring archaeology to a wider public." And he was very, very strong on the subject, and it brought me up quite short actually, and set me thinking, and I've never forgotten it, never.
Did that completely change your perception of it?
I think I was slipping in that direction anyway.
Right.
Very often that's the case, isn't it? You're inclined to do it, but that was the sort of kick up the backside I needed, and it confirmed it, and I've always done it ever since. Yeah. In fact, when we started the big dig we did in Peterborough at Fengate, ahead of expansion of Peterborough New Town, as it was then.
Was this the 70s?
This was 70s, 1971. We worked there between 71 and 78, continuously more or less, every summer. But when we started that, one of the first things we did was to have a site museum. I bought an old hut, and we converted it into a site museum. And one of the blokes who worked for us was an amateur carpenter, and he knocked up some display cases. And then we had a stand for the public, because it got so popular. People used to come in on the weekends, so we built a stand out of scaffolding. Of course, now you wouldn't be allowed to do it because health and safety would say, "Oh no, you can't do that. They've all got to wear hard hats or something." Yeah. But no, it was hugely popular. And then I produced a popular booklet called People of the Dawn.
Fantastic title.
Great, which I did with the Peterborough Evening Telegraph,
as
it was then, Telegraph as it is now. And it sold like hotcakes, sold out. I think we had to do 3 reprints.
So that was your first,
basically
populist
exactly
piece of writing, if you like. Yeah.
That was my first populist piece of writing, and then I got so involved with writing the heavy-duty reports.
Which must take hours upon hours.
It does take a bit of time, but it's like, when people often say to me, "What's the most difficult writing to do?" Presumably everyone assumes it's these heavy-duty academic reports. I can bring some in now that they'd break the table. No, they're I nearly said a piece of piss, but they're quite easy to do.
Well, I suppose they're not the sort of thing anyone's going to read from beginning to end, are they? Really?
No, they're not intended to. Most people, you read the discussion chapter at the end, and then you go back and look at the other pieces. Yeah. But the thing about them is that the author can use jargon, and you don't need to write in an elegant fashion or.
Well, you can explain a lot.
Exactly, and it's going to be sorted out by an editor anyway. And it does lead to sloppy writing. After I'd done about 4 or 5 of these big reports, I suddenly thought, no, this is not good enough for you. You must do something about your English.
I mean, it struck me, as a layman interested in archaeology, there's an enormous number of digs over the decades that haven't been written up. I mean, I'm reading that Mike Parker Pearson's Stonehenge.
Oh, brilliant
Riverside.
book.
Yeah, fantastic. I didn't realise how little had been excavated around Stonehenge, but even the ones that had been excavated, a lot wasn't written up.
I know. It is sort of a national archaeological disgrace. There was a professor called Richard Atkinson who dug at Stonehenge, and he never published in the end. And you wouldn't get, I don't think you'd get away with that now.
No. You wouldn't be funded, would you?
You wouldn't be funded, and even your university, because you have to crank out these reports. Now, admittedly, it is a bit like producing sausages, but these reports have to be produced. And I think, the university authorities would have said nowadays, Richard, come in from the field and write those reports up. And that was a great loss, that we've never had those reports. And there are a lot of other sites that haven't been written up, but it doesn't happen so much nowadays, I'm glad to say. People are much better.
Yeah. And it's changed also, because the way legislation has changed, it's taken for granted that any large development will have archaeology done beforehand if there's, interest there.
Exactly, yes. And I think all of that is good. Some of the standards of archaeology done, leave a bit to be desired, I think, because it's done on competitive tendering and the cheapest bid gets a job. But having said that, it's enormously improved on what used to happen in the past. I can remember going into a gravel pit, I won't say where, and I walked across this gravel pit. They'd stripped all the surface, all the topsoil off, and so they just revealed what was in fact the Bronze Age subsoil. And I walked across this gravel pit, and there must have been, I don't know, a dozen Bronze Age burial mounds, barrows, and you could see the graves.
Right.
And then, they just went crash. The old drag lines came out and smashed the lot. And that was standard. That was absolutely standard in the 60s and early 70s. But the actual legislation that demanded that you should, if you're going to develop a site, the developer paid for the dig. That didn't occur until 1989.
Really?
And believe it or not, it wasn't, a left-wing politician. It was Maggie Thatcher, of all people. And she said, no, it's quite right, you've got to do that. And I never thought I'd say a nice word about Maggie Thatcher, but good on her.
Yeah.
She had the guts to do it, and that has been made a huge difference. And in fact, it was the British law which became the model for much of what Europe now does.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to say it's now standard practice in Britain and most of the civilized world.
You must shudder when you think what has been destroyed and.
Oh, yes, absolutely, yes. And the trouble is, it's easy to look back and say, oh, what a shame that was. What you must say is, you look back on something like the Euston Arch, which has to be, as vandalism goes, that personally approved by the Prime Minister. Yeah. Oh. As vandalism goes, that's about the worst example in Britain. Yeah. And so what you have to say is, we'll learn from that. Yeah. We will never, ever do another Euston Arch.
And there's PR value in it for these. The Crossrail development across London. The stories that come up talking about that are always about something that has been discovered, or the latest thing, this Bedlam burial ground, isn't it? We're going to try, hopefully, even find the bodies of the first levellers. That were.
That would be good.
Yeah. England's first working class martyr.
Yes.
Yeah. When did it? Reading your books, from Britain BC AD through Seahenge, Home, the most recent one, your non-fiction books, you can tell that you love being a storyteller. When did you realise that?
I can tell you exactly when I realised that. I realised that when I was asked to write the Batsford book, the English Heritage Batsford book of Flag Fen, which was, I think, it was quite early on. It was sort of 81, 82.
Were there those A4 sort of
That's
stories,
it.
yeah.
Yeah,
Which
and a
was
very
fantastic
popular series.
Yeah.
Great series,
Yeah.
and that Flag Fen book's still in print. You can buy it at Flag Fen. I forget it's a different publisher now, History Press. I wrote that, and it got very well received. And a dear friend of mine, Professor at Reading, Richard Bradley, and he came over to do a lecture, I think, and we were in the pub afterwards. And Richard said, it reads like a novel. And, that sort of put the idea into the back of my mind. But I did nothing about it. Did absolutely nothing about it. But I mean, like most people, I wrote short stories and, started writing novels, but they always ended up in the wastepaper basket.
All gone because you got
Exactly, another deadline occurred. But I'd always had this urge to do it. And what eventually happened, what tipped me over into taking it seriously, was I've always liked crime fiction, but about sort of, a few years ago, about sort of 10, 15 years ago, I started reading more just because. I think it was because I was doing time team, and you needed something to relax in the evening.
Right. Yes.
You don't pick up an excavation report.
You're surprised.
You're feeling knackered.
Give them breathe.
Exactly. No, you're feeling knackered, and the only thing is rebus or whatever it was.
Yeah.
I've read nearly all the rebuses. I'm having to ration myself as I'm getting near the end of them. God, what a master he is. Oh, Rankin. Awesome, man. Anyway, where was I? Oh yes, fiction. I started reading crime fiction, and one of the books I read was by a lady writer called Ellie Griffiths, and it was called The Crossing Places. And I bought this book because on the jacket it said a burial on the North Norfolk coast. So I thought, burial on the North Norfolk coast, this sounds up my street. So I bought it and read it, and about sort of 2 chapters in, I thought, hello, this sounds like Seahenge. And it read very like Seahenge. And so I flipped back to the acknowledgements, thinking, better check here. Yeah. And there, she was a handsome acknowledgement to my book, Seahenge. She said, on which this book is heavily based.
So you hadn't had any prior warning?
No, I know. So I know the prior jokes. No, it's part of my life.
Sorry, I had to get one of this.
But no, I hadn't. But she gave a lovely acknowledgement. So that's absolutely fine. It's a huge mega seller, so it must have helped Seahenge. And I have met her subsequently, and we'd done a lecture together. But that set me thinking. I could set a. Do a fictional excavation and have a crime take place as part of it, and it just happened that about a year later I was doing a mini series, Britain's Lost Atlantis, for BBC Radio 4, and the producer of that lovely man, who I'm still in close touch with, Martin Kurzik, we were sipping I think it was a glass of Highland Park, and Martin said, Francis, I've just been reading Seahenge. And I said, yeah, did you enjoy it? He said, yeah, oh, cracking. He said, the last chapter actually, reduced me to tears. And because that's based on truth, but, slightly highlighted, shall we say. And he said, have you ever thought of writing fiction? And I said, well, vaguely, yes, it has been, crossed my mind. And he said, well, because you do speech quite well. Because there's quite a lot of speech in there.
Yeah.
And he said, that is the tricky thing. Most people have trouble with that and produce very stilted speech, but yours reads quite well. And so then I really got thinking. And then the next thing that happened is poor old Mick Aston, who, of course, created Time Team with Tim Taylor. That's it, the two of them created Time Team. Mick had a minor stroke, well, he used to, not so minor stroke, and he couldn't do as many Time Teams as he normally did. So I agreed to do roughly half the Time Teams that Mick couldn't do. And I was at the time writing a non-fiction, a big non-fiction book for Penguin, which has come out as Home. And I took this work with me because I was already, the deadline already slipped, the way they tend to.
Yeah, who does it say? I love a good deadline. The sound, whooshing sound it makes it goes past Douglas Adams, I think.
That's it, yes. That's it.
Yeah.
And so I tried to do it in the evenings doing a tiny. It just didn't work. I just couldn't pull all the strands together. So it was, and then I thought, well, blow this. I've got the little MIDI computer. So let us have a go at doing fiction. So I did it thinking that there'd be fewer strands to pull together. That was my first mistake. But it got me going. And after the end of that season, I think it was Time Team Series 18 or something like that.
How long does it, filming for you, how long does that go on for, you know?
Each regular Time Team episode.
They say 3 days.
Is 3 days. It's 3 days, but then I normally have to do, if I'm the archaeological director, as I tend to be, you've got a day's recce, or sometimes even 2 days recce to have a look at the site. Then you've got the 3 days, and sometimes you stay on an extra day. Right. Although I tried to avoid that.
I'm off.
yes. So, you know, it essentially takes out a week.
Yeah.
It's basically a week gone up the tubes. So I had quite a few of them. And at the end of the season, sort of, you know, November, whenever it is, I'd got halfway through the book. So I then worked on it over the winter and produced the first draft. And I thought, oh, well, I'll read that through now. You know, gave it a month, fortnight or something, and then came at it cold. I thought, oh my God, this is rubbish. So I reworked it, and after about...
Did you keep the plot though? I mean,
the plot, the basic plot, yes.
Yeah, right, yeah.
The basic plot, yes. And then I think it was round about draft 6 or 7 that I showed it to my wife, and she made me remove all the sex scenes. She said, I don't want you ending up like Alan Titchmarsh winning the Bad Sex Award year after year. So,
wife being one of the best editors to start with, yeah.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So I then rewrote it, being a little bit more subtle about the bedroom scenes. And I then felt, well, this is more or less, this is verging on the competent. So I sent it up to my editor, not my editor, my agent in London. My agent, I'm very lucky, I've got about the best agent in the business. He's Hilary Mantel's agent, so he's dropping names heavily. Bill Hamilton's his name, and he's been my agent for, 15, going on 20 years, a long time. Any rate, Bill said, Francis, you've got the following problems. A, B, C, D, E. I thought, oh God, back to the drawing board.
Yeah, and this was draft 7, was it?
This was draft 7, yeah. And I think I showed Bill 4 drafts, which takes us up to about 11. And then he said, well, I think it's almost competent now, Francis. Leave it 6 weeks and then come back to it again. And do the following things I would suggest. So I did them. And draft 12 was what I eventually submitted for publication. And what's interesting, I just finished it. And I was at Hay-on-Wye Book Festival, where I was promoting my last book for HarperCollins, which was The Birth of Modern Britain. And I'd just been doing my talk, and I don't know whether you know Hay, but when the authors have done their talks or are going to their talks, they're led by normally a young lady carrying a tulip. So you feel like a bit of a knobhead actually. It's meant to boost your ego.
Yeah, how that is meant to put you at your ease, I don't know.
I don't know, but anyway, it's quite nice. I like Hay. It's got a great vibe. Any rate, so I just done my thing, and I come out of a green room and was walking across a sort of lawn outside the big tent, And I suddenly got hailed by this chap. He said, "Francis!" Thinking, oh God, not another Time Team fan. It was a bit like that in those days. And it turned out to be an ex-Time Team director called Justin Pollard. And Justin had made a really big name for himself, not just in his own books, but in doing feature films. And he was one of the people who helped set up QI.
Right.
And he's a head elf,
Right.
chief elf. And he had set up a publishing house with John Mitchinson, his friend, and John is the chief bloke at QI. I mean, he's the boss man.
Right. Yes, I think I've seen it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And John and Justin and one other chap had set up this crowdfunding publishing house called Unbound, and it was the first and really and still the most successful. And he gave me a card and said a few well-chosen words about Unbound, which I completely forgot. Anyway, got back home, and there was this manuscript. Actually, I printed it out in those days, when printers worked.
Yeah.
And then I suddenly remembered the card, and then Googled Unbound, and I thought, my God, this looks rather interesting. And my agent had said, did I want him to take the book round to other, to publish to conventional publishing houses? And the trouble is, I knew from other authors that one of the things that happens, that if you do a book and it's at all successful, they hook you in on a 3-book agreement, which is another, it's writing hell. And I was
time scale as well.
Exactly. Yeah, you have to produce it fairly quickly. And at the time I was 68, something like that. And frankly, I didn't need a 3-book agreement.
No.
I wanted to enjoy my writing. Okay, well, that's self-indulgent of you, Francis. Yes, it is, but damn in hell, why can't I be self-indulgent in the last quarter of my life? So I decided to go down the Unbound route, and I have never regretted it, because you are in far closer contact with your readership. It's quite a hard job. I mean, it took me best part of 6 months to get together for 600 subscribers.
Right.
I learned how to tweet, which is essential.
Yeah.
My blog became much more active.
How do you resist giving too much away about the book?
Sorry,
how do you resist giving too much away about the book?
I think it's very easy that you have pound symbols in front of you, and you realise that if you give away the plot, the book won't sell. That way it lies penury. So, but you're right. You do want to. You really do, but you mustn't. I've got quite an efficient way of avoiding it. My brother-in-law is a whiz on the internet, and ever since I've had a blog, he posts the individual entries. I don't put them up.
Right.
And because he is very clever, because I was once rude about a popular, what should we call them, hamburger chain, and I accused them of producing slime burgers.
Right.
And no names, no pack rules, they say. And he said, no, you haven't distanced yourself enough from them. They're legally red hot. They'll come down on you like a ton of bricks. Don't risk it. And after that, because I didn't fancy being sued by anyone. And so it's great, because Nigel looks after the blog, and he gets modern, up-to-date links and things in, and the design of the thing is his. So I just have to worry about the content.
Yeah.
And he's an editor, and I have always believed in editors.
Yeah.
I mean, any author who says I don't need an editor, my prose is perfect. Prose may be perfect, but it might be pompous too.
Yeah.
You need an editor to prick your bubbles every so often. And I've been very fortunate. I had very good editors at HarperCollins, a brilliant editor at Penguin, and now at Unbound. See, I thought maybe, and this is something I know that worried my agent, going with Unbound, the editorial standards mightn't be so high, but far from it. They're red hot. I've got no less than 2 editors.
Right.
A script editor who, her background is, well, she's at Oxford, but her background is sort of feature film screenplays and things, and she really understands that, and runs a creative course at Oxford, creative writing course. And she, keeps me under firm control. So I've been editing the second Alan Cadbury one, the one set in Ely, for the past 4 or 5 weeks. Using her comments, and I'm learning. That's a great thing about it. I'm learning so much.
It must have been a very different discipline. You're tied to a story that has to hold together and get to a resolution, and secondly, because it's not recounting an interpretation of a set of facts, is it? It's you could go down team routes.
Exactly, and there's a human emotion thing which you never have to deal with in archaeology.
Really?
Well, you do when you're running a site. You certainly do when you're running a site, because it's all about teamwork. That's one of the big differences. You mentioned earlier on that how has archaeology changed over the past 40 years, and one of the profound differences is that in the past, in the sort of pre-war and 1950s, digs were stratified. The organisation of digs was, very hierarchical. You get it in Agatha Christie, her accounts of digs in Egypt and things, Murder on the Nile and all the rest of those. The director walked around with a pork pie hat and a walking stick and said, dig there, and people scurried around to do his bidding, or her bidding in the case of some leading archaeologists. But then all of that changed in the 60s and 70s when you got rid of employed workmen, and all the work was done by students and people who were qualified. And you couldn't tell a student what to do, because they'd turn around and say, up yours. Why do you want me to do that? So as soon as you got the why question raising its head, you then had teamwork. Teams started. And all the digs I ran, I didn't run. They were run by the team. So my wife Maisie was a key part of the team. Charlie French, who is really important down in Cambridge in the department there, he was another member. David Gurney, who now runs Norfolk Archaeology, he was another one, and so on. There were several key members, and we all worked together. I won't say we agreed all the time, we certainly didn't. There were some blistering arguments, exactly. But the other thing that's great is that we're all still friends, all of us, and close. If any of that team who dug Fengate or any of the other sites I dug in the 80s and 90s were to die, I'd be devastated, because they're really part of my life. And I hope, it was two-way. And it was teamwork which got the sites dug. And Alan, in the books, is a team player.
There's a couple of things I really like about the book. Doesn't mean there's things I don't like. 2 things I like most out of it. He's a totally different kind of character. But knowing that you are an archaeologist, as a reader, you're always questioning. I think, I wonder if that's a bit like Francis. I wonder if that's like, you must have been cherry picking foibles and funny habits of everyone you've met over the last 40 years, probably. I don't know. Or is he a completely fresh construct? I don't know.
Yeah. This is the question I get asked quite a lot. is Alan Cadbury Francis Pryor? And the short answer is no, he's Alan Cadbury. And how can you be sure of that? Because I know him. He's in my head. He is a person, and he doesn't always do things that I like or approve of, but I have to let him do them because that's what he does. And yes, he is based on me. Of course he is. Based on my experience of life and of archaeology and of human relationships. But he's not me. And that's a crucial thing. I mean, in the current book I'm writing, or is editing now, one of the people who I wanted to be a villain is based on someone in archaeology who I really don't like. They sort of epitomise everything I dislike. And I really wanted this person to come to a horrible, sticky end. And so the book started writing, and slowly as time passed, the nasty person wasn't quite as nasty. So I'd have to think, oh my God, he's meant to be nasty, I must make him nastier. And then he'd do something that's actually quite nice. And what I didn't realise, but I realise now in hindsight, is that he had acquired a life of his own. And as a result, he became more credible as a character. Because people aren't black and white, I mean, except in bad films. We're all black, white and grey.
Yeah.
And in the end, this chap turns out, I won't say well, I'm not going to give it away, but he's not the villain that I thought he was going to be. And they all these characters acquire their own, all the major ones acquire their own life. And I don't know what it is. I really don't know what it is. And I can remember once, my editor once said, oh, could X do Y? That would really add to the plot as it would give it. And I remember writing back to him saying, well, actually no, X wouldn't do Y. It's just not in his or her character.
Hearing you talk about it, and a couple of other talks earlier, I think that is the bit you love the most, isn't it? That those characters have all they've become people, or they you know how they'd act, how they'd react in a situation, whatever. And
I think it's a bit sad, actually. Francis has got his imaginary friends. Yeah. No, but you're absolutely right. It's an awful, pretentious thing to say. It's creative, but it isn't. They create themselves, and my job is to observe them and and see how things turn out.
Do you think it's reinvigorated your attitude to writing if you do another non-fiction book? I know you mentioned in your blog that you've got one gestating there. Do you think that is going to be informed far more by what you've been doing?
Yes, I certainly think my fiction informed Home, which is a serious book, but it's also a personal book, and I don't see why the two shouldn't be, shouldn't go together. It's always assumed that if you write a personal book, it's really, it's by definition lighter, but it isn't. That's a serious book, but it is definitely informed by my fiction writing, and things outside archaeology. It's informed by the building of this house back in '95, because I'm interested in how building of a house alters people's lives and affects their relationships, as it would have done in the Iron Age or the Bronze Age just as much as today. But I think what Home was about was the family structure, and that family doesn't mean conservative. That families can be radical places. It's not. You always have this awful vision of sort of right-wing Republican religious families in America. All teeth shining and going to church, and that's what family life's all about. It doesn't have to be. Family life is, far more creative. And what really worries me about the way we're governed in Britain, with our top-heavy, Westminster-focused political system, is that it has nothing to do with families at all. And it's got no checks and balances. I feel it's made me, writing that Home book and writing the fiction, but getting inside someone like Alan's head, has made me far more radical. as I've got older, I've moved further and further to the left. I really have. Yeah, I'm quite an old bolshy now.
Mark, that's that is so it is fantastic that it has an effect on you, doesn't it? Writing these books as well. It's a two-way process.
It is a two-way process, and one that I really enjoy. I want to write lots more. The first 3 I think are going to be set in the Fens and will be very archaeological. The next one I'm planning. I don't know. I'm very tempted to set it at Flag Fen. If only because Alan could meet the discoverer of Flag Fen.
True.
He's an extraordinary bloke.
I've heard.
He's awesome, absolutely awesome. And I think Alan's going to be really impressed. He's tall, he's very thin, he's very dark.
Athletic.
Athletic, yeah. But also razor sharp intellectually. So I think that could be quite good.
Yeah. And then from there on, that will become the central character.
But yeah, I mean, I think the great thing I love about writing the sort of fiction I do is that it has to be grounded. So Lifers Club is grounded in this part of the world, in the Lincolnshire Fens, but the landscape gives it coherence and gives it discipline. The second one that I'm working on now, The Way, the Truth and the Dead, is set around Ely, and it owes a lot of its structure to the landscape there, which is very different from up here. I mean, this is a very gentle, undulating, on the whole, quite not as starkly flat as Ely, because the flat bits around Ely are really flat. They're black peat fields, and then you get the high islands, places like Ely and Sutton and so on. Around here, the flat bits, because they're laid down by the sea and not by fresh water, they gently undulate because they're often low dunes. And then you get tidal creeks. And so the flat land here undulates, and the islands only just protrude above the ground, sort of maybe 2 or 3 meters. But it's nothing like around Ely. It's a totally different landscape. And I love that difference. To outsiders, of course, the Fens are flat and boring. And I encourage this. I really encourage this perception of the Fens being flat and boring, because what we don't want is to be invaded by hordes of people seeking something picturesque and chocolate boxy, because they'll ruin the Fens like they've wrecked the Cotswolds.
So you're in the editing stages of book 2.
Book 2, yeah.
Book 2, yeah. And then have you got a rough idea in book 3? Have you set an internal time?
I have set an internal timetable.
You don't have to say.
No. But what I'm planning, I'm going to do another non-fiction. But as you were hinting earlier, it's going to be very different from my previous ones, I think. I'm planning to make it much lighter, appeal to a younger readership. And I'm probably going to be doing it jointly with a friend of mine who's a cartoonist. So that's going to be great fun. I'm really looking forward to it. But I suspect it's going to require quite a lot of discipline to do. These things do. Someone told me that the most disciplined form of writing there is comedy writing, which is why so many comedy shows are done by 2 people, because they discipline each other. So that's the next project. With any luck, I'll get that done by the autumn, and then so late this year, early next year, I'll start writing Alan Cadbury's 3. So when will that appear? Summer of next year, I thought.
Fantastic. The important thing, though, is that people can sign up to support. Basically, you pre-order the book, essentially, don't you?
That's it, and you get your name in the back.
Name in the back. I must admit, after the launch went to Toppings in Ely, I went back and I went on and...
I saw that.
But it's brilliant, because you've got different levels of what you can opt for, can't you? You can either have a signed one, or I'll just have a paperback, or I'll have the plush special edition that's...
Yes, right. You get for a tenner you get the ebook. 20 quid you get a special hardback. So there is a special hardback of the Lifers Club. So you've got the cheap and cheerful trade book there. And then I also do a book.
Some bloke signed it, look, which has made it.
Oh, that's half the value.
That's
yeah.
half the value.
But and then there are various other things like for 50 quid you get a signed copy, and then I think for 100 quid I take you on a tour around Seahenge in King's Lynn Museum, and then I think for 1,000 quid I take you to bed or something. I don't know.
Fair enough.
But cheap at twice the price.
Which it strikes me as a fantastic way of you getting involved with the people as well, and it's a really good way of building up anticipation, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and people who've signed, because they get their name in the back, they tend to tell their friends, and their friends do it. And what I like about it, it's going back in a way to the 19th century, because there is a huge book, I've got it in my shelves somewhere, a double volume excavation report on the excavations at Glastonbury and Mere Lake villages in Somerset, which was done I think 1907, and that was published by subscription. And so in the back, just like in Life Club, is a list of names. And one day, idly, I was sitting in my bookshelves, thumbing through the back of it. I thought, I'll just get a P, see who's there. Robert Marlborough Pryor, my great-grandfather had subscribed to it. I know.
Yeah.
It was a real buzz.
Yeah.
And I so I like it because it actually personalises. I mean, if you read the list of names at the back of the Life Club, it's a who's who of archaeology.
The way that the Unbound thing, basically you build up a set of subscribers. When you reach a certain level, then it's all systems go and get it produced. So it's I guess quite exciting for you seeing those tot up as you get towards it, but then also knowing I probably had better finish it. And
with luck, I think I'll get all the subscriptions in, I don't know, end of April, something like that. Yeah. And then when they're all in, we can start the business of the production, proofing and editing and that sort of thing. That will take another couple of months at least. I would have thought we'll be seeing the book appear late summer.
Fantastic. Well, people had better get along there quick and sign up to it.
Pay up.
Pay up. Yeah, we want to find out what's happened to Alan Cadbury in the next day and next. Well, I hope you carry on fleshing out the life of Alan Cadbury. I think it's incredibly interesting. But it's what I love as well about it is that it seems such a logical step for what you're doing, and it's a fantastic creative process, being able to draw on umpteen different experiences. And I guess, if you hadn't been doing so much work on TV and writing books that are aimed at a popular market, you wouldn't have made those links, I guess, to become that kind of communicator.
And there is a secret agenda too.
Right.
The secret a secret agenda is that it gives me a chance to excavate the sites I never had a chance to do in my life. Ideal sites, dream sites.
That must be the bad part of being an archaeologist, mustn't it? Do you ever go to bed thinking, why couldn't I have been the one that found that? Or,
Well, there's always a bit of that, but this way it's great because, if I want to find a stunning Iron Age burial where the man is put in the ground with a hideous grin and a gold necklace and a silver helmet. He can do it.
Yeah. Second something who's found.
Oh yes, makes something who look like a.
So it's actually a lot of wish fulfillment, which is fantastic. Well, thanks so much for talking to us.
Jolly good.
I look forward to, as we say, the rest of his career, but also all the other books. How do you find the time for it? I don't know.
Yeah, it's like running a dig. It's no different. Running a dig is all about managing time.
Managing your own time.
And my own time, yeah. But that's what archaeologists do best.
Thank you very much. It's been fantastic talking to you.
Cheers.